Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Get more of the sports you love on Sports Extra with BT Sport and Premier Sports.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then.
What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
All right, it is that time of the evening. It is the football show, so it's time to sit back and relax and pour yourself a cold or a hot glass of whatever it is you're having yourself. With you for the next hour, Adrian with you until 10, and a little bit later on we're going to be chatting to Marcela Mora Iarajo. We're going to talk to Marcela about dancing Brazilians and the possibility of Brazil-Argentina semi-final. Well, wouldn't that be absolutely delicious? Before all of that, Dan McDonnell from Qatar. Come on in, Dan.
Hi, Adrian. How are things?
How are you getting on?
Good.
Everything is fine here, Adrian. Yes, I'm really enjoying the experience, and I must not say too much.
Everything was wonderful. Yeah, no, I mean it's what are we, a couple of weeks in, probably past the halfway point. Yeah, I can enjoying the football. Obviously, there's other aspects of the competition has been well documented and been writing about them. Obviously not so great, but it's sort of part of the this is the story of this World Cup, like the what I've said it before coming over here, like the history of a World Cup is always wrapped around the venue, and obviously particularly pronounced in this case.
Yeah, we might talk about some of those stuff maybe even to kick off with, because obviously we're on the eve of the World Cup quarterfinals now, and the reporting from Qatar today about a man named Alex who's in his early 40s. He's from the Philippines. We've been using that vague old catch-all phrase about migrant workers up to this point, and now that there's actually some details about somebody who's passed away this week, we might use them. But Alex fell to his death while carrying out repairs, it's reported, on a resort which was being used previously by the Saudi Arabia team, still bedecked in all the FIFA livery, and FIFA have issued a statement to say that they're saddened by it, and there's been other statements that have followed as well, but it's brought back up the agenda, Dan, a little bit of the conversation around the outrageousness of some of that stuff that's happened with migrant workers over the last decade. Have you felt that conversation on the ground there, or how's that been?
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose it's striking as well, like the case you mentioned. Like you have a name, like you just have Alex. You don't necessarily have a huge amount of detail, and obviously, like, there's a real fear for staff on the ground or people working here to sort of speak and tell their stories. There, in many cases, there are sort of a lot of sort of faceless characters, because they're sort of, I don't know, fearful about the consequences of maybe speaking out about their situations here, their working situations here. I mean, all you can go off is your own sort of your first-hand impressions of it, and like it's certainly I've had sort of conversations. You have conversations with people, in taxis or shops or various members of staff, and again, like, you can't generalize. You can't say everyone is living the same experience. Some people are you chat to them and they're reasonably happy with their life here, but obviously very aware of the idiosyncrasies of the place and the sort of the more worrying aspects of the place, the fact that they don't have any real sort of union protection or anything like that. They're obviously very aware of the implications if they complain. Like, you chat to someone who could tell you a story about.
I think that we're going to just have to knock Dan off the line there and try and re-establish contact with him. There's just a bit of a dip off in Wi-Fi. You're back, Dan.
Sorry, Adrian, I don't know what happened there.
Just you were just talking about chatting to some of the local people, some of whom or the stories around the migrant workers at least seem happy with their lot. But I mean, look, it's hard. It is hard because you're not there with a direct brief, obviously, to get stuck into that area. In terms of like the response, Dan, right? Like, it from the stuff that I've read, it seemed like a lack of safety equipment either provided to or used by Alex, who was dispatched to fix lights in a car park, we're told, and is one of the near 6,500, of course, depending on where your sources lie, people that looks at the minute who won't be counted as a death relating to the World Cup, as it wasn't an official FIFA site. And the response from officialdom it's head scratching in the almost lack of awareness from them about managing the message, almost even at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, and like this is the thing about Qatar, and you're right, like there's sort of a dispute around like the number of deaths, and I think at one point they were trying to claim there was maybe 3 people had died working on the stadium, and now they've revised that upwards, and I think like you can dispute the specifics of specific numbers or figures, and they have done that, but what is definitely can't be disputed is like the high number of unexplained deaths that there are and there have been in Qatar over the last decade. That in most countries, you have to register a cause for death, and there's a very, very small number of unexplained deaths, whereas in Qatar the figure is incredibly high, the percentage is incredibly high. This one has been reported. It's very, I know that sort of, accidents on sites do happen, but it's obviously just the fact that it's tied in with this sort of this large figure over a period of time. And yeah, the response, what was the quote? That death is natural, in life, and in whether at work or in your sleep, or sort of words to that effect, it doesn't come across particularly.
It doesn't quite capture it, yeah. And there was the when the CEO was on Piers Morgan, which I'm sure was a show like me, Dan, that you're a regular viewer of. It was the old cliche about one life being too many, and then you just had like the FIFA General Secretary Fatma Samora out today, or in the last 24 hours at least, saying that it wasn't appropriate that she was asked about this even from a reporter, Neil Barker from SNTV. She was attending a FIFA conference. Almost how dare he sort of bring this up. And then you had Nasser Al Khater, who was in the same vein, Qatar 2022 CEO, just incredulous that they're getting asked these questions. The overarching point for me, Dan, is slightly bizarre in that they do seem to accept that there have been 6,500 deaths in the country. It's just like where those are appropriated, and ultimately, who cares where they're appropriated? Like it's not up for discussion that they've happened. It just seems so bizarre that, I think overall it's important for us to have this conversation, because I do think in a couple of weeks' time, when all this is done, that the circus, as I've said before, moves on and nobody discusses it anymore. I think whatever spotlight we can give it now is all it's ever going to get, right? Because I think once this thing moves on in a couple of weeks, it moves out of people's consciousness. We all forget about it. We talk a little bit about the World Cup, and this stuff, it becomes a footnote.
Yeah, well, I know they're talking about maybe going for the Olympics, and I assume they still want to bring some big sporting events here. So I think you possibly will see people in time, referring back to Qatar and seeing what's happened. This is the thing about visiting here now for the tournament. We're not seeing the real Qatar as it normally functions. Like, a lot of the construction projects have stopped. They didn't want people to necessarily be able to film or capture, take photos of sort of people working, outdoors and sort of pretty, like, it is winter here, so it's not as oppressively warm as it will be, in their summer months. But they have like stopped a lot of the work that would normally be taking place here. So I think if someone was to come back next month, they would see a completely different picture. I had a cab driver the other day who works in construction who's just become a cab driver for the month, and a lot of people have done that. There's a lot of like taxi drivers who are just their job has stopped and they needed to find something else for the month. So again, like, the picture that people are getting in their time here isn't actually really reflective possibly of the real Qatar in a lot of ways, and that's something you have to be conscious of when you hear some of the reviews from people about how wonderful a time they're having. That doesn't have any, like, this is a show that rolls in and exists off its own rules to a point for a month, and then normal life here will continue from next month, and that's going to be a very different normal life for a lot of people that are here.
Can I ask you about that, like, normal life bit? And look, I think Gavin Cooney was making the point on this show and elsewhere as well over the last 24 hours that how are we supposed to know about normal life? We're being sort of whisked around, sort of almost Disneyland-esque from one venue to another, as tends to happen at all of these tournaments. But the stuff like the and I only ask it really, Dan, in terms of the valid point that you make about the Olympics and other major sporting events potentially coming down the track. The stuff that Gary Neville and like Richard Keys and the World Cup CEO tell us about the slow improvements around conditions there, the treatment of gay people, the demolition of the kafala system. Have you any sense as to, like, is that a PR job, or is some of that actually rooted in reality?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. Like, you know, you would chat to people who would, you know, I would have had a conversation with someone who would have spoke about times recently where, you know, the non-payment of workers like would be an issue, and a couple of people went out onto the street to protest, and his claim was that those people were then deported for doing that, you know. And there's still you always have this element of you know, is the issue really just with rogue companies as opposed to Qatar the state, which would be a sort of a quite a common defense you would hear, is that, you know, Qatar can't claim responsibility, you know, for the actions of every employer operating within their jurisdiction, even though everything within this jurisdiction is controlled, you know, from above, like from the top, you know. So no, and this is the thing, like you can't really get that sense. Like I saw Miguel Delaney had a piece where I thought it was a good line, and it sort of resonates a bit. Like, people make a reference to the locals, but actually, like, the locals aren't, like, during my time here, I haven't really encountered anyone who's from Qatar, you know, as in you see people walking around, but I haven't had a conversation with anyone because they're not doing any of the sort of the jobs that are left to the people who are pointing you to the metro, who are, you know, the security staff and hotels, or the places where you encounter people. It's all, you know, this is where all the migrant workers are. You know, this is how society functions here. They are the engine that sort of drives the whole place. And yeah, like, within that, like, there is obviously just a sense that, yeah, like, there's some people here I've chatted to a couple of people who are very content with their life, but even they will say that they accept that they are the luckier ones. You know, they know that they are the luckier ones because they all know of people living in pretty difficult conditions. And so I know that the point will be made that there have been improvements in recent years, that Qatar might be further along the road than some other places, even in this region. But it's still clear that they have a hell of a road to travel. There's enough stories have come out about various sort of like, you know, episodes that have occurred to people isolated. But again, it's very much out of sight. As I said, like, we're seeing Disneyland definitely is something that springs to mind when you have all these games you can go to and these clean metro stations, and everything looks wonderful. But it's sometimes what you don't see as well. And I think even around where I'm staying, there's a lot of just like a lot of abandoned sites and a lot of stuff, you know. It seems to they've these buildings and they're looking for someone to fill them. Like, you know, there's advertisements everywhere for, you know, office space for hire. And I asked someone about this, and they're like, yeah, this is all around the city, but they don't have the businesses to go into them. So I don't know, like, I part of me would be fascinated to come back in 4 or 5 years and to see, you know, because it is obviously trying to, like, style itself as, you know, as a rival in some ways to Dubai, and the whole David Beckham thing. If you're flying on Qatar Airways here, like, there's an in-flight movie of David Beckham, and it's called, like, David Beckham's Qatar Stopover, or words to that effect. So they're clearly trying to, like, aim it at that sort of high-end tourist market, but it doesn't appear to be finished in a lot of ways. And I don't know. Yeah, it's you really are, like, you're examining everything you see all the time to see, is this real?
If it's good enough for Bex, it's good enough for me. Like I can mix it with Bex if you know. It's a sort of a weird. I always find that one a slightly weird one. One last one on it, Dan. Right? Because I think it was important to talk about it, right? And we'll talk about the quarterfinals upcoming. And I know you were at the Louis van Gaal press conference today, so I definitely want to get your insights on that. But you're obviously I don't think it's any disrespect to say a veteran now of these tournaments. What is your if you I say it with respect. I've been at some of them with you. What's the if you were to forget about all that stuff we've just been spoken about and you were just dropped in there without the context of all of that stuff that's been going on over the last few years, what's your sense of it as a tournament versus some of the other World Cups or Euros you've been at?
Yeah, no, I think the group stage was good. You know, I think again, like it's such a strange tournament because of the amount of games you can attend. Like it doesn't even compare to other tournaments in some ways. Like you're able to go to like 2 games per day. So you've probably seen a lot of football actually relative to previous tournaments, and probably have a little more of a sense of, you know, seen quite a large number of teams and a large number of games. And from perspective of like the level of the football, I think it's been good. I think you know, the drama of the group stages at the end of it was up there with probably favourably with any sort of group stage of recent memory, I think, and like also drives home the madness of potentially changing that format in 4 years' time, which is again like one of these things that will annoy you. Like the World Cup works as it does, you know, and it's such a great competition as it stands, and it doesn't need to be tinkered with, and it doesn't need to be tainted by, you know, being brought to the wrong places. And you know, it's I think as a football experience, been able to see a lot of games. Yeah, it has. Like it's been good. I think. I mean, the round of 16 didn't necessarily ignite, but in some ways, like the reward for that is that you have these heavyweight quarterfinals that are coming up. You know, that in some ways you didn't want too many shocks at that stage because it's sort of created a drama now that does exist around the last 8, and I think there's 8 good stories in there.
I love a good lot of heavyweights in the quarterfinals. I won't lie, don't like to see too many minnows getting in there. How many of these games are you going to get to?
Well, no, it'll be 2. So they don't allow you to do 2 games per day.
Do they not?
In the knockouts,
way.
they don't. No.
Even though geographically it's easily done, I presume.
It could be done feasibly, yeah, and there obviously will be there'll be FIFA people doing it. I mean, Infantino will be on the screen 1 minute into it, into all of the games, but no, media-wise, no. I suppose the reason for that would be extra time and penalties and the delays caused by that.
I presume there's a clamour for the 2 late games, is there, in that case?
So I'm going to the 2 late games to Holland, Argentina, and England and France. And I think the thing is there is a clamour for these games, but Brazil are still a huge draw, obviously, as well, for obvious reasons. So the fact that you've got Brazil and Argentina on the same day is possibly divided some of the media hordes that were here. So I've got into the game anyway. I think some people might have been a little bit nervous about being rejected, but that hasn't proven to be the case.
There might be a few empty seats that they might be able to. The one thing that we're fairly certain of. I was sort of slightly on the fence, to be honest, about the Netherlands Argentina game until I saw some clips from the Louis van Gaal press conference today, and now I want Netherlands all the way. Or I have to say, keep them in the tournament as long as we can. What happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's sort of in feisty form, Van Gaal. Now, I suppose like this isn't a huge surprise. I mean, I suppose remember his time at Manchester United, he would have had some back and forths with various people. But I think like a theme of the Dutch tournament has been the style of play that Van Gaal is playing. You know, in Holland they would view like the wing back system, you know, the 3-5-2 or 5-3-2 or however you want to describe it, as quite defensive and against their traditional principles, and he's received criticism from that throughout the tournament, and he seemed to have come to the press conference today in the mood to have a few digs at people, regardless of whether they asked questions or if the subject matter had come up or not. So yeah, I mean, from the start, like he's been asked about the fact that, and this is true, like they will be comfortably outnumbered in the stadium, the Holland fans, Like, I think, he was making a reference to the fact that, there might be 40,000 Argentines there and only 1,400 Dutch. But then he did make the point of saying that's 400 more than some people were expecting. And he named this journalist who's been writing negative columns about him. It was like a Dunphy Jack Charlton style thing or something, because this critic was in the audience, and then later asked a question that Van Gaal didn't like at all. And had to go back at him. So the story then transpires, and look, we're getting this through the earpiece, because it's a back and forth in Dutch. And the interpreter, I have to say now, was working overtime here, because there was a real sort of argument of some descriptions. But it turns out that this reporter had filed a story earlier in the week about finding Van Gaal's phone in a toilet, and he had found Van Gaal's phone, and he recognised it was Van Gaal's phone because there was a picture of Van Gaal with his wife as the sort of screensaver. And it's just a really bizarre story. Even as you're telling it, it's just a bit odd, And like, Van Gaal refused to take a question from him about defensive tactics or something, and then you can make your own answer up, just like you did finding my phone in the toilet. And like, everyone in the room is a bit like, what's actually happening here? Like, what's going on here? And like, Memphis, then this guy asked Memphis Depay if he thought of Van Gaal as a bit like an embarrassing uncle or a fun uncle. And Depay didn't like that question either. So there was just a weird little bit of a vibe to it. But the next minute, he was like cracking jokes and laughing about how he was going to give Memphis a big kiss now, because they got on great. They didn't always get on great. And like, on the way out of the room, he was smiling and chatting and posing for a selfie with people. So like, 1 minute you could listen to one clip and say, God, he was in really bad form today. You could listen to another and say, geez, he was in great form today. But the whole thing was it's kind of box office in its own way. Like, he's actually just this big personality who's like very at ease in this room of the international media. It's like, this is where he was born to be. But they are the underdogs, and possibly, like, he's at pains to point out that the style of football that they're playing is the way you need to play now to succeed, and that is basically the underlying message that ran through the whole thing.
Yeah, and I look at it, maybe Australia played above themselves, and that's Argentina have a higher ceiling to get to. It is in some ways a hard one to call. Your expectation then on Saturday evening, Dan? What's the football coming home, or what are we thinking at this stage?
I'm not sure if it's coming home now, but you certainly look at that England team and you think that at some stage in the next decade it probably will come home. Just with the profile of their squad. I'm not so sure. I mean, I've seen probably more France than England here, just in terms of the games I've been at. And the one thing you can't get away from, it's just such an obvious point, but like, it's just Mbappe's form is just out of this world, and practically like very, almost impossible to defend against in some ways. And even Poland, like, Poland probably did a lot of the right things to counter him, and he still scored 2 amazing goals. And I think this England side are really good. I think they're capable of beating France. There's a lot of reasons to believe, you can construct an argument as to why they will do it. But I just think maybe that the French front four, the movement even of Griezmann, who's been very, very good in that role, and that even if England get a little bit distracted by the Mbappe task, it just opens up options for other players. So I'd be leaning in the way of France just about doing it. But I have to say, I think if England got through, although Portugal were very good, I still think I'd possibly fancy England against the winners of the other quarterfinals. So I really feel like this is a huge game for them. It's definitely there for them.
I think it's a fair point. I don't know, certainly one of the joys of being at covering a major tournament like that is that you just get to focus on it and nothing else for the duration. So I don't know if Martin O'Neill's comments have bubbled into your timeline over the last 24 hours.
So this is to do with Declan Rice and Jack Grealish.
Exactly, yeah. He said that he was, he didn't want to coerce them into playing for Ireland.
Yeah,
that it was the wrong thing to do. He's to summarise it, trying to summarise as succinctly as I can. He said that the question came up about the 2 lads playing for Ireland, and he said, look, he gave them some friendly matches, didn't want to just cap them at full senior international level in a proper capped game for the sake of doing it and coerce them into playing for Ireland. That it needed to be a decision that they were happy and comfortable with to make themselves. I have to say, I kind of felt as if it made some sense what he was saying, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's almost two different cases, right? The Grealish one, you would chat to people who were around the dressing room with Grealish, even at 21's level, and I think there was people who always had the sense that he would jump, or had a feeling that his preference was to go that way. I think the Rice one is the uncomfortable one for O'Neill still. And at the time, I wouldn't have been madly critical of him because, the whole concept of bringing someone on, against Moldova, in the 90th minute to tie them down, I wouldn't be crazy about it. But then, as it happened, in O'Neill's last game in the job, he did bring on Michael Obafemi at the end, and it did seem like he'd sort of changed his policy to some degree, like he was capping someone a little bit ahead of schedule, just maybe to get them tied down. I think the Rice one, it is the fact that he did play 3 games for Ireland, he was in the middle of it, and you do feel the previous autumn, if he had been called in, would he have backed out? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that he would have. In a way, we just have to get over it and get on with it. But Rice was. I think they just didn't envisage that Rice would go.
No. And also, if he'd have stayed, he would have, people make decisions in life all the time about what to do. And if he'd have made that decision, he'd have been just as comfortable with it, and he would have been on board and playing as many games. And I don't know. It's
yeah. The only thing is though, you do see other nations, Wales have been pretty good at getting people into their setup and keeping them there, and fending off sort of other associations. And I still think there are other managers who would have approached it differently, and they might have had more success with Rice. They might have been able to tie that. Yeah, it's just we this keeps coming up as a talking point because they are two players that Ireland really need. They are the skill set they have is almost what Ireland lack in their team, and that makes it all the more painful. But we have to get over it and get on with it. But it's still. It could have been handled differently, the Rice one, I feel, but I'm not sure. I still can't say with certainty if he would have reached the conclusion that Ireland wanted either. It might have forced his hand a little bit quicker to make his call.
Yeah.
In
hindsight,
they're gone now.
In hindsight, they all get lumped in together. But I'm with you, and I do feel bad about asking the question, but at the same time, I felt obliged. It had cropped up, so hopefully, it's the end of it. Dan, listen, enjoy the games over the weekend. Thanks a million for that.
Thanks, Adrian.
Cheers.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky, proud partner and supporter of the Republic of Ireland women's national football team.
This is News Talk.